An elderly woman who could never have children found a stray cat at the dump. What happened after left everyone in tears. "Oh my God, David, look at Lucky. He can't breathe." Susan sobbed, her voice breaking between sobs, her arms tightly holding the small cat who was convulsing violently. "Calm down, Susan," David said firmly, his voice trying to sound reassuring, even as his face showed no signs of stress. As he saw foam pouring from Lucky's mouth, "Let me see. We have to get him to the vet right away." That breathless moment was just part of a touching story of love and sacrifice. To hear the full story of Susan and Lucky, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this story. A dry, convulsive sound echoed from the living room, tearing through the quiet of the late afternoon. Susan, idly gazing out the window, where the last drops of a summer thunderstorm streaking down the glass, startled. A cold sense of unease ran down her spine. "Lucky," she called, her voice trembling slightly. No meow answered, only a series of strange, more urgent thuds. She rushed into the living room, her heart pounding in her chest. The sight parried her, made her freeze. Lucky, her beloved orange tabby kitten, was sprawled on the Persian rug, his entire body convulsing violencia. His eyes were rolled back, and foam frothed at the corners of his tiny mouth. Muffled, pained whimpers escaped his throat. Susan felt the blood in her veins turn to ice. The room suddenly seemed to tilt. She sank to her knees beside Lucky, her trembling hands wanting to touch him, but afraid of causing more pain. "Lucky, oh my God, Lucky, what's wrong with you?" Her cry was lost, desperate. The little cat continued to writhe in an uncontrolled seizure, his small body thrashing on the floor. Susan was utterly helpless, a profound horror gripping her. She had never felt so panicked and alone. For a moment, she thought she was about to lose her beloved child again, a familiar pain, yet still as sharp as a knife. She could only clutch her head, hot tears streaming down her face, mingling with choked sobs. Just then, the doorbell rang. Susan Miller, a woman in her late 50s, with neatly trimmed salt and pepper hair and eyes that still held a distant sadness, had lived alone in her small apartment in a quiet Portland, Oregon neighborhood since her bitter divorce 15 years prior. The cruel reason for the breakup, a truth she had tried to bury but which still festered: she couldn't have children. Infertility had been diagnosed when she was young, and it had robbed her not only of motherhood, but also of the husband she had once loved dearly. Mark, her ex-husband, though initially sympathetic, found his yearning for a complete family with the laughter of children gradually pushed them apart. The obsession with a home devoid of a child's cries and laughter haunted Susan, causing her to withdraw into a quiet, somewhat solitary life. On long, drawn-out evenings, she would often sit alone by the window, watching the hurried crowds flusso by on the street below, wondering if any of them could feel the utter emptiness in her heart. Her life drifted by monotonous and dull, until one damp, drizzly April afternoon. That day, on her way home from the grocery store, as she passed a small, dark alleyway nestled between two tall buildings where large, foul-smelling dumpsters stood, a faint, pathetic cry stopped her in her tracks. At first, Susan thought she had misheard, but then the cry came again, weaker, more desperate. Curious and a little apprehensive, she cautiously stepped into the alley. Beside an overturned dumpster, amidst a pile of damp newspapers and cardboard boxes, she saw a tiny creature. It was a kitten, its orange fur matted with dirt, its body soaked and shivering from the cold. It lay curled up, its eyes closed, its breath as faint as if it were about to expire. Susan's heart clenched. She couldn't believe someone could be so heartless as to abandon such a small, helpless creature. Without hesitation, she gently pushed aside the filthy rubbish, carefully scooping the kitten into her arms. It was so small, it fit snugly in her two hands, ice cold and almost lifeless. She quickly pulled open her coat, bundling it inside for warmth, and hurried home. That was the inciting incident, the fateful moment that completely changed her otherwise dreary life. She named him Lucky, with a fragile hope that he would bring luck not only to himself, but to her as well, warming her cold heart and filling the lonely void in her soul. Susan had no idea that her decision to bring Lucky home that day was not just saving a life, but also the beginning of a challenging yet love-filled journey. Under Susan's dedicated and meticulous care, Lucky gradually made a miraculous recovery. In the early days, the kitten was so weak that she had to use a dropper to feed him warm milk, staying ingredient of many nights to monitor his temperature and breathing. She turned a corner of the bathroom into a makeshift field hospital, lining it with soft towels, placing a heating lamp, and painstakingly cleaning and changing Lucky's bedding. Her love and patience seemed to infuse the tiny creature with strength. A few days later, Lucky began to open his eyes, large, round, emerald green orbs that stared blankly at her. He started to suckle milk from a bottle himself, then took his first wobbly steps on the floor. From a timid stray, easily startled by loud noises, Lucky gradually became attached to Susan, never leaving her side. He was like a little orange shadow trotting after her from room to room. When she sat reading in her favorite armchair, Lucky would jump onto her lap, curl up and fall asleep, purring softly. When she cooked in the kitchen, he would sit at her feet, looking up at her with his bright eyes as if cheering her on. In the evenings, instead of the oppressive silence, Susan's small apartment was now filled with a nuzzling meow, the pitter-patter of tiny paws on the wooden floor, and the contented rumbles of purring when she stroked his soft fur. Susan found in Lucky the child she never had. She pampered and cared for Lucky like a true mother, showering him with all the love she had suppressed for so long. She talked to Lucky, telling him about her day, the books she read, the music she listened to. Though she only received meows in response, she still felt understood and connected. Lucky became her reason for living her little baby in her eyes. She bought him expensive toys, the best quality kibble, and even knitted him tiny sweaters to keep him warm in winter. Her few friends and neighbors all noticed a marked change in Susan. She was happier, more outgoing, and the usual melancholy in her eyes had vanished. However peaceful, life did not last forever. After about a year of happy coexistence, Susan began to notice unusual signs in Lucky. Sometimes, while playing cheerfully, Lucky would suddenly freeze, staring blankly into space, his body trembling slightly. Other times, he seemed disoriented, stumbling a few steps before returning to normal. Initially, Susan just thought Lucky was being mischievous or a bit clumsy due to his young age. She reassured herself that there was nothing to worry about. She took Lucky to the vet a few times, but general checkups revealed nothing abnormal. The vet suggested it might just be temporary reactions or due to a kitten's hyperactivity. Susan's anxiety grew as the frequency of Lucky's strange behaviors increased. Once, while she was watching TV, Lucky, who was sleeping on her lap, suddenly twitched 10 times, his eyes slightly bulging for a few seconds before he dozed off again. She felt her heart skip a beat. She started researching online reading forums about cat health, but the vague information only made her more anxious. She became overprotective of Lucky, not daring to let him play alone for too long, always keeping an eye on him. A vague fear of something bad happening began to creep into her mind, casting a dark shadow over the days when she thought she had rediscovered joy and meaning in life. Tragedy struck on a cold November evening as the first winter rain began to fall heavily outside the window. Susan was preparing dinner in the kitchen, the rhythmic clatter of her knife and cutting board mingling with the soothing classical music emanating from the old radio. Lucky, as usual, was playing with his favorite red ball of yarn in the living room. Suddenly, the crash of something shattering echoed, followed by a terrifying silence. Her intuition screamed that something was wrong. Susan quickly turned off the stove, her hands still dusted with flour, and ran to the living room. The sight before her was horrifying. Lucky was no longer playing. He lay sprawled in the middle of the floor next to the ceramic vase he had knocked over and shattered. The little cat's entire body was convulsing violently, uncontrollably. His eyes were wide white, and foam was starting to bubble from the corners of his mouth. Muffled, choked gasps escaped his tiny, heaving chest. This was the first full-blown grand mal seizure Susan had witnessed in Lucky, far more intense and terrifying than any previous unusual behavior. Susan froze, an overwhelming fear engulfing her. She felt as if the ground beneath her was crumbling. "Lucky! Oh my God, Lucky!" she screamed in despair, rushing to his side. She wanted to hold him, to do something to stop the horrific seizure, but she was utterly helpless. She could only clutch Lucky tightly, feeling as if she was about to lose her beloved child once more, this pain amplified utpayaden by the deep bond she had formed with him. Her tears flowed like rain, her choked sobs and desperate cries for help echoing throughout the apartment. Fortunately, Mr. David Peterson, her kind elderly neighbor from the apartment across the hall, a retired teacher with years of experience owning cats and dogs, heard her cries and the unusual sounds. He rushed over. Seeing Lucky's condition, David, though also startled, remained calm. He immediately recognized it as a seizure. "Susan, calm down. Let me see," he said, his voice trying to be reassuring. He gently pried Lucky from Susan's tight grip, placed the cat on his side on a soft pillow to prevent him from biting his tongue, and moved surrounding objects so he wouldn't injure himself. The seizure lasted for what felt like an eternity of minutes before slowly subsiding. Lucky went limp, panting heavily, his whole body flaccid. Immediately, David said, "We need to get him to the vet ER right now." Without a second's hesitation, Susan grabbed her coat, and together with David, they wrapped Lucky in a warm blanket and rushed out into the cold, rainy night, heading for the nearest emergency veterinary hospital. At the hospital, after the veterinarians had administered emergency care and Lucky was out of immediate danger, the head of neurology met with Susan privately. He delivered heartbreaking news: Lucky had congenital epilepsy. MRI scans and other tests confirmed it. The doctor explained it was a chronic condition, manageable with medication, but incurable. And then another detail shattered Susan's heart even further. Based on old faint scars on Lucky's body and his malnourished state when found, the doctor suspected his previous owners, upon discovering his illness, had cruelly abandoned him on the streets, perhaps unwilling or unable to care for a sick animal. Beatings might have occurred. The callous abandonment and the severe illness had deeply scarred the poor kitten's young memory. Hearing those words, Susan felt as if someone was squeezing her heart. She looked at Lucky lying listlessly on the examination table, an IV drip still in his paw. The pain of Lucky's past intensified her love for him, transforming it into an unshakable commitment. This was the turning point. From that moment on, Susan was no longer just an animal lover who had adopted a stray cat. She had become a mother, a protector, a lifelong companion to a tiny creature burdened with a cruel illness. She vowed to herself that she would never let her child suffer any more harm. The road ahead might be difficult, but her love was greater. Susan and Lucky's life entered a new chapter filled with challenges, but also steeped in love and determination. Caring for a cat with epilepsy demanded dedication, patience, and a certain amount of knowledge. Susan threw herself into learning about Lucky's condition. She read countless books, medical journals, and joined online forums for owners of epileptic pets to learn from their experiences. Her small apartment now had a dedicated medicine cabinet for Lucky, stocked with various anti-seizure medications and nerve supplements prescribed by the vet. Susan's every day revolved around Lucky's schedule. She had to ensure Lucky took his medication on time in the correct dosage, a task not at all easy with a cat. She had to crush pills, mix them into his favorite food, sometimes resorting to tricks, like luring him with fragrant tuna flakes. She meticulously recorded every minor seizure Lucky had in a notebook, the time it occurred, the duration, the severity, and potential triggers like loud noises, sudden changes in light, or even when Lucky got too excited. That notebook became a crucial tool to help the vet adjust Lucky's treatment plan effectively. Visits to the vet became more frequent. The cost of medication tests and consultations began to be a significant financial burden on Susan's modest pension. She had to cut back on many personal expenses, forgoing the occasional concert tickets or short weekend getaways she once enjoyed. But she never complained. Every penny spent on Lucky, she felt, was worth it. However, despite careful care and regular medication, seizures still occasionally afflicted Lucky. Each time, Susan's heart would stop. She had learned how to stay calm, how to provide first aid when a seizure occurred, but the fear and sorrow never diminished. There were nights she stayed awake, sitting beside Lucky, listening to his every breath, terrified of missing any unusual sign. During these difficult times, Mr. David, her kind neighbor, became a great source of support. He frequently dropped by to check on them, sometimes helping to look after Lucky when Susan had to go out, or simply sitting with her over tea, listening to her worries. The friendship between the two elderly neighbors grew closer, more bonded. David also shared his experiences in caring for sick pets and introduced Susan to an online support group for owners of epileptic pets. Joining this support group was another small turning point for Susan. She found empathy and shared experiences from people in similar situations. They exchanged tips, encouraged each other, and together navigated the challenges of caring for their special four-legged friends. She no longer felt alone in this fight. However, there was a particularly difficult period which Susan later called her dark night of the soul. It was when Lucky experienced a series of severe seizures despite an increased dosage of medication as prescribed by the vet. The cat became tired, weak, and less playful. Susan was on the verge of breaking down. She tormented herself, wondering if she was doing the right thing, if she was prolonging Lucky's suffering. The thought of having to make a painful decision flickered through her mind, but she quickly dismissed it. She couldn't give up. Her love for Lucky was too strong. She went to the vet, requesting more tests, searching for new treatments, more advanced medications. She was willing to do anything as long as it could help Lucky. Her persistence finally paid off. After numerous medication adjustments and adopting a special diet recommended by a veterinary nutritionist, Lucky's condition gradually stabilized. The number of seizures significantly decreased, and when they did occur, they were milder than before. Lucky became cheerful and playful again, though he still needed close monitoring. Susan breathed a sigh of relief, but in her heart, she knew this battle would be long. She was prepared for anything. Her love for Lucky had been tested and had grown stronger than ever, ready to face the final climax. One late spring afternoon, as brilliant golden sunlight streamed through the window, Susan was reading a book, Lucky curled up asleep on his soft cushion beside the unlit fireplace. Suddenly, Lucky bolted upright, his body rigid. His eyes flew open wide with panic. Susan immediately recognized the dreadful signs. This was no ordinary seizure. It began with focal seizures, then quickly spread to his entire body, more violent than any before. The cat cried out piteously, his body writhing. Susan quickly put down her book, her heart pounding like a drum. She tried to keep Lucky on his side, but the seizure was too powerful. A few minutes passed, but the seizure showed no signs of abating. Instead, it seemed to worsen. Lucky began to have difficulty breathing, his breaths shallow and rapid. Susan realized this was a cluster seizure, a series of continuous seizures without recovery periods, an extremely dangerous condition that could be life-threatening. Trembling, she grabbed her phone and called the vet. "Doctor, it's me, Susan Miller. Lucky, he's having continuous seizures, very severe." Her voice was choked with fear. The doctor instructed her to bring Lucky to the emergency clinic immediately. Susan hastily wrapped Lucky in his familiar blanket and rushed out of the apartment. Fortunately, Mr. David was just returning from the market. Seeing her frantic state and Lucky's condition, he said nothing. Immediately got his car and helped her drive Lucky to the hospital. Throughout the journey, Susan clutched Lucky tightly, tears streaming down her face. She prayed for her little child to survive. At the clinic, the medical team was ready. They quickly rushed Lucky into the emergency room. Susan and David paced anxiously outside. Time crawled by with agonizing slowness. Every sound from the emergency room made her heart clench. She remembered the first day she found Lucky, remembered the happy moments with him, remembered the unconditional love he had given her. The thought of losing Lucky was unbearable. Would her love and care be enough to save him this time? Did she have the strength to face the worst? The question bored into her mind painfully. After nearly an hour of intense stress, the chief veterinarian emerged, his face serious, but with a hint of relief. "We've managed to control the cluster seizures," he said. "Lucky's condition is temporarily stable, but he'll need special monitoring for the next few days." Lucky had pulled through the crisis once again, proving his incredible will to live. For the next few days, Susan practically lived at the hospital, only going home when Mr. David insisted she get some rest. She sat by his oxygen cage, holding Lucky's tiny paw through the bars, whispering words of love and encouragement. Gradually, Lucky recovered. He started eating again, and the familiar spark returned to his eyes. When Lucky was finally allowed home, Susan and his life entered a new normal. The recent dangerous seizure was a stark reminder that Lucky's illness always carried risks. Susan became even more vigilant in his care. She installed cameras in the apartment so she could monitor Lucky even when she wasn't in the same room. She learned advanced first aid techniques and always kept an emergency dose of medication prescribed by the vet on hand. But above all, her love for Lucky deepened. She no longer saw a sick cat, but her brave child, a little warrior who had fought valiantly against fate. The loneliness that had once enveloped her life had completely vanished, replaced by a sacred maternal love, even if it was for a small abandoned orange tabby. Lucky, with his special needs, had given Susan's life a purpose, a meaning she once thought she would never find. In the afternoons, she would again sit by the window, not to watch the bustling crowds with an empty sadness, but to watch Lucky basking in the sun on the windowsill, his orange fur gleaming under the sunlight. Occasionally, Lucky would rub his head against her leg, letting out soft purrs like a thank you, an affirmation of the unbreakable bond between mother and son. Mr. David continued to visit regularly, and they became close confidants, sharing the joys of old age and their love for their four-legged companions. Susan understood that every day with Lucky was a gift. The stray cat she had rescued from the dump had not only brought luck to himself, but had also saved her soul, teaching her the meaning of unconditional love and the power of sacrifice. Lucky was not just a pet. He was family, the child that fate had bestowed upon her in an unexpected way, a miraculous love story between an infertile elderly woman and a tiny cat with the heart of a lion. And every tear she had ever shed now sparkled with happiness and infinite gratitude. Ultimately, the story of Susan and Lucky is more than just a woman and a cat. It is a testament to the sacredness of motherhood, a love that can blossom in the most unexpected places, transcending species barriers. Susan, a woman who suffered from infertility, found the meaning of motherhood through caring for, loving, and sacrificing for Lucky. And Lucky, the little abandoned cat, taught Susan and all of us that love for animals has the power to heal warm, lonely hearts and bring joy and meaning to life. That love, whether for a human or a small four-legged creature, is precious and has the ability to transform lives in the most miraculous ways.